The grand hall of Viridian Prime stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and floating platforms. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the circular chamber, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and melodic tones. Han Jiwon stood at the human delegation's platform, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the proceedings with careful eyes. She had been Earth's ambassador for 2 years now, and every session felt like walking through a minefield. The other species looked at humans the way someone might look at a dangerous animal in a cage. Curious, yes, but always ready to step back. Today's session was different. Jiwon could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. The Callus rose from his seat, his tall frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. The Viridian counselor's skin shifted colors as he spoke, a sign of agitation among his people. He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. Images of Earth appeared: wars, explosions, soldiers fighting, cities burning, weapons of terrible power being tested. The display showed humanity's entire bloody history in a 10-minute presentation that made Jiwon's stomach turn. "This is what humans are," the Callus announced, his voice carrying across the chamber. "A species that has spent its entire existence perfecting the art of destruction. They have fought wars over resources, beliefs, and territories. They have created weapons capable of destroying their own planet, and now they want to join us to spread across the galaxy with these same instincts." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some species nodded their equivalents of heads. Others made sounds of agreement. Jiwon felt her jaw tighten. She had known this was coming, but seeing her species reduced to its worst moment still hurt. She glanced at Dr. Kang Mirai, who sat beside her reviewing data on a tablet. The young scientist looked up and gave her a small nod of encouragement. "Ambassador Han Jiwon may now respond," the assembly moderator announced. Jiwon stepped forward, her boots clicking on the platform as she moved to the speaking circle. She took a deep breath and began. "Counselor Thakalis has shown you our past, and I will not deny it. Humans have fought wars. We have destroyed. We have killed our own kind over things that seem trivial now. But he has shown you only part of the story." She activated her own display. New images appeared. Humans building hospitals in war zones, scientists from different nations working together on the space station, volunteers rescuing people from disasters, artists creating beauty from pain, children of former enemies playing together. We have also spent our existence learning, growing, and changing. Every war taught us the cost of violence. Every conflict showed us the value of peace. We are not proud of our past, but we are not defined by it alone. We are defined by what we chose to become. A Centauran delegate named Kuvara raised one of her multiple limbs. "Ambassador Jiwon, your words are moving. But how can we trust that humanity will not bring its violent nature to the stars? Your species achieved space travel only recently. You have not had time to evolve past your aggressive instincts. With respect, Ambassador Kuvara, we do not need to evolve past our instincts. We need to control them. Every species in this chamber has instincts. The Viridians have territorial impulses. The Centaurans have competitive drives. The Morpheans have survival reflexes that make them hostile to threats. But you all learn to work together despite these instincts." The Callus made a sharp sound. "Those instincts are not the same as systematic warfare. Humans are predators. Your evolution shaped you for hunting and killing." "Yes," Jiwon said simply. "We are predators, but we are also social creatures who learned that cooperation brings greater success than conflict. We are problem solvers who create tools. We are storytellers who pass knowledge across generations. We are all of these things, not just one." Kang Mirai stood up, requesting permission to speak. The moderator granted it. "I have studied the evolutionary histories of all 47 member species," Mirai said, her voice steady despite the thousands of eyes watching her. "Most of you evolved on worlds with abundant resources and few natural predators. Your paths to intelligence came through cooperation because your environments rewarded it. Earth was different. Humans evolved in an environment of scarcity and danger. We developed traits that helped us survive those conditions. But those same traits, aggression, adaptability, quick decision-making under stress, they also helped us become successful as a species." "Successful at destruction," the Callus interrupted. "Successful at survival," Mirai countered. "And now successful at choosing peace when we could choose war. That choice means something. Perhaps it means more than never having the capacity for war at all." The debate continued for hours. Jiwon spoke until her voice grew hoarse. She presented evidence of humanity's progress, its art, its philosophy, its growing understanding of the universe. She showed how humans had unified their world government specifically to present a peaceful front to the galaxy. But the fear in the chamber was stronger than her words. When the vote came, it was close. 25 species voted to classify humans as a Class 4 hazard species. 22 voted against the classification. The restrictions were severe. Humans would be confined to their home system and 3 nearby uninhabited systems. No human ships would be allowed in assembly space without military escorts. No human colonies on worlds within 20 light-years of existing alien settlements. Jiwan stood silent as the verdict was read. She felt the weight of her entire species on her shoulders. Billions of humans who wanted nothing more than to explore the stars, to meet other civilizations, to be part of something greater. They were all being judged for the sins of their ancestors. Commander Li Taeyang approached her after the session ended. The military officer's face was carefully neutral, but Jiwan could see the anger in his eyes. 5 years of diplomacy, and this is what we get, he said quietly. We keep trying, Jiwan replied. We show them who we really are. And if they never believe us? Jiwan did not have an answer for that. As they left the chamber, Mirai pulled up a screen on her tablet. There's something else. The Assembly's Science Council received a signal from the Galactic Rim, strong and repeating. They're dismissing it as background radiation, but the pattern is too regular. Should we be concerned? Taeyang asked. Mirai frowned at the data. I do not know. But if I were designing a warning signal, it would look something like this. The 3 humans stood in the empty corridor of the assembly station, surrounded by species that feared them, bearing restrictions that caged them, and staring at data that nobody else seemed to think was important. Jiwan looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, something was sending a signal, and somehow she knew their isolation would not last forever. She just hoped that when things changed, it would not be too late. 5 years had passed since the restrictions were put in place, and humanity had learned to make the most of their cage. The 3 systems they controlled buzzed with activity as ships moved between mining operations, research stations, and growing colonies. It was not the grand expansion into the galaxy that humans had dreamed of, but it was something. Park. Hyunwoo wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked on the shield array in the engineering bay of Border Station 7. The young engineer had spent the last 6 months developing a new harmonic system that could theoretically protect ships from energy weapons that the standard assembly shields could not handle. Try it now, he called out to his assistant. The test beam fired, and the shields shimmered with a new pattern of interference waves. The energy dissipated harmlessly across the barrier instead of punching through like it had in previous tests. It works, his assistant shouted. Hyunwoo allowed himself a small smile. Maybe being stuck in 3 systems was not so bad if it gave them time to innovate without interference. Across the border, just outside the restricted zone, Choi Yoonji piloted her freighter through the darkness between stars. She was not supposed to be here, technically speaking. The flight path she was on brought her too close to assembly space. But technically and actually were 2 different things, and Yoonji had made a career out of understanding that difference. Her cargo hold was full of human movies, music, and books. Alien collectors paid surprisingly well for human culture, even if their governments called humans dangerous. She had regular customers on 5 different worlds who waited eagerly for her shipments. Approaching Checkpoint Delta, her co-pilot announced. Yoonji adjusted their course slightly, threading between patrol routes that she had memorized months ago. The Assembly's border forces were not expecting smugglers because most species did not have the concept. Humans, with their long history of bending rules, had no such limitations. She delivered her cargo to a Centauran merchant who ran a small shop on a space station. The alien's multiple limbs moved excitedly as he unpacked boxes of human novels. Your stories are so strange, the merchant said. So much conflict, but also so much hope. My customers cannot get enough of them. We are a complicated species, Yoonji replied with a grin. Back in human space, Yoon Dae-ho stood in front of a group of young recruits who had been born on colony ships and space stations. These were the first generation of humans who had never seen Earth, and they were learning combat techniques that Dae-ho hoped they would never need to use. Again, he ordered, and the recruits ran through the training exercise. Dae-ho was 48 now, and his body carried the scars of 3 wars from Earth's past. He had retired from active combat, but when Command asked him to train the new generation, he could not refuse. Something in his gut told him that peace would not last forever. "Sir, why are we training for ship-to-ship combat?" one recruit asked. "The Assembly has not fought a war in 3,000 years. "Because peace is not the same as safety," Deho replied. "And being unprepared is not the same as being peaceful." In the diplomatic sector, Han Ji-won continued her slow work of changing minds. She met with sympathetic delegates, built relationships, and gradually chipped away at the fear that kept humanity isolated. It was exhausting work that showed little visible progress. But she refused to give up. Today she was meeting with Ambassador Kuvara, one of the few alien delegates who seemed genuinely interested in understanding humans, rather than just fearing them. "I have been reading human philosophy," Kuvara said as they sat in a quiet meeting room. "Your thinker named Gandhi said that nonviolence is the weapon of the strong. It is a fascinating concept. We have learned much from our history," Ji-won said, "both from our mistakes and from those who showed us better ways. And yet the Assembly keeps you locked away like prisoners." Ji-won chose her words carefully. "We hope that time will prove our intentions. We are patient." "Patience is a luxury," Kuvara said. "I hope you do not run out of time before minds change." Meanwhile, Dr. Kang Mirai had become something of a celebrity in xenobiological circles. Her papers on comparative evolution were required reading at universities across assembly space. She used her platform to subtly argue for a re-evaluation of humanity's classification, presenting data that showed human aggression as an adaptive trait rather than a flaw. She was in her lab when the alert came through. The signal from the galactic rim had grown stronger, much stronger. What had been a faint, regular pulse 5 years ago was now a clear repeating pattern that could not be dismissed as natural phenomena. Mirai immediately sent the data to the Assembly Science Council and waited for a response. When it came, it was disappointing. "Insufficient evidence of intelligence," the message read, "likely a pulsar with unusual characteristics. No action required." She showed the message to Commander Lee Taeyang when he visited her lab the next day. "They are not even investigating it," she said, frustration clear in her voice. Taeyang studied the signal pattern on her screen. His military training made him see patterns that scientists might miss. "This is not random. Something is out there. I know, but the Assembly does not want to hear it from humans. They already think we are paranoid and aggressive." Taeyang made a decision. "Send me everything you have, quietly. Command has given me discretion to prepare for scenarios beyond the quarantine zone. If something is out there, I want to be ready." Over the following months, Taeyang worked in secret with a small group of human ships, preparing them for long-range operations. He called it training exercises, and technically it was not against any regulations, but everyone involved knew they were preparing for something specific. Park Hyunwoo's shield technology caught Taeyang's attention. The commander visited Border Station 7 to see the demonstration himself. "How effective is it against unknown threats?" Taeyang asked after watching the test. "Unknown is the key word," Hyunwoo replied. "But the harmonic system adapts to different energy frequencies. It should work against most directed energy weapons, even types we have not encountered before. I want this installed on my ships, all of them, and I want you to keep improving it." Hyunwoo nodded. He did not ask why a fleet that was not supposed to leave human space needed advanced defensive systems. He just did the work. Choi Yoonji returned from another smuggling run with interesting news. "The aliens are nervous," she told her contact at command. "I have been doing this for 3 years and I have never seen them like this. They are not talking about it officially, but people are scared." "Scared of what?" the officer asked. "They do not know. That is what scares them. Something is wrong, but their governments are not telling them anything." The information made its way to Ji-won, who filed it away with growing concern. The Assembly had survived for 3,000 years through peace and cooperation, but she was beginning to suspect that they had also survived through luck. No real threats, no tests of their systems, just comfortable peace that had made them soft. Then the border station started going dark. It happened gradually at first. One station near the galactic rim stopped responding. Then another. The Assembly sent investigation teams, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left but debris. Mirai analyzed the wreckage data that was leaked to human channels. Whatever did this, it was not a natural disaster. The stations were destroyed by something biological. I can see organic residue in the metal. The signal? Taeyang asked. Could be a warning. Could be a beacon. Could be a dinner bell. Within weeks, 3 alien colonies on the rim went silent. The assembly could no longer ignore the problem, but they also had no idea how to respond. Their military, designed for peacekeeping and ceremonial purposes, had not fought a real war in recorded history. Jiwan watched the emergency assembly session from her quarters. She could see the panic in the alien delegates' faces as reports came in. Whatever was out there, it was not stopping. It was getting closer. Her communicator buzzed. It was Thakalis, the Viridian counselor who had led the effort to restrict humanity 5 years ago. Ambassador Jiwan, he said, his voice tight. We need to talk privately. She agreed to meet him in a secure room. When she arrived, she found the counselor looking older than she remembered, his skin color muted with stress. The rim colonies, he said without preamble. One of them is Viridian. My brother's family lives there. Lived there. Jiwan felt sympathy pierce through her professional distance. I am sorry. The assembly is going to lift the restrictions on humanity, Thakalis said. Not because we trust you. Because we are desperate. We need your weapons, your warships, your... He struggled with the word. Your capacity for violence. Jiwan looked at the counselor who had once called her species dangerous monsters. Now he was asking those monsters to save him. The first time anyone saw them clearly, it was already too late for the colony of New Viridian. The recording came from a cargo ship that had been jumping into the system just as the attack began. The footage would haunt everyone who watched it. They came from dark space like a living wave. Ships that were not built but grown. Organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns, hundreds of them, moving with the coordination of a single organism. The Devourers, as they would come to be called, fell upon the colony with methodical efficiency. The Assembly Defense Fleet tried to respond. 3 cruisers moved to intercept, their ceremonial weapons powering up for the first time in actual combat in over a millennium. They fired. Their shots hit the organic ships, leaving scorch marks and torn flesh, but the Devourers kept coming. Then the Devourers fired back. Bioenergy weapons, streams of what looked like living electricity, tore through the assembly shields as if they were not there. The first cruiser broke apart in seconds. The second tried to retreat but was caught by 3 Devourer ships that latched onto its hull and began dissolving it with acidic secretions. The third cruiser managed to send a distress signal before it too was overwhelmed. Down on New Viridian, 4 million colonists tried to evacuate. They did not have enough ships. They did not have enough time. Han Ji-won watched the recording in the emergency assembly session, her face carefully blank even as her heart raced. Around her, alien delegates were panicking. Some were crying. Others were shouting. These were species that had known only peace, and they were not prepared for what they were seeing. 3 more colonies have been attacked, the moderator announced, his voice shaking. Total casualties estimated at 11 million. The Devourer fleet is advancing toward the core systems. The Kali stood and the chamber went silent. I motioned to immediately lift all restrictions on humanity and request their assistance in our defense. There was no debate this time. The vote was unanimous. Ji-won felt no triumph, only grim determination. She activated her communicator. Commander Taeyang, you are clear to mobilize. Taeyang had been waiting for this moment. His fleet, 12 ships that humanity had quietly prepared over 5 years, jumped to the border system within hours. They were not the largest ships, and they were not the most advanced by assembly standards. But they were built by people who remembered how to fight. The Horizon's Edge, Taeyang's flagship, led the formation. On the bridge, young Nam Jinho sat at the tactical station, his fingers flying over controls as he coordinated targeting solutions. At 24, he was one of the youngest officers in the fleet, but he had trained under Yoon Dae-ho and had a natural talent for combat strategy. Enemy contacts detected, Jinho announced. 16 Devourer ships bearing Mark 327. All ships, battle formation Delta, Taeyang ordered. Lock weapons and prepare to engage on my mark. Park Hyunwoo's shield system was active across the fleet. He watched from Border Station 7 as his technology was about to be tested in real combat. His hands gripped the console as the engagement began. The human ships moved in a way that confused the Devourers at first. They did not hold formation. They scattered and attacked from multiple angles simultaneously. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. This was how humans fought. The Devourer bioenergy weapons lashed out, but Yunwu's shields held. The harmonic patterns adapted to the frequency of the alien weapons, dispersing the energy instead of absorbing it. It was not perfect. Shields still failed under sustained fire, but it gave the human ships crucial seconds to respond. Taeyang's fleet fired back with kinetic weapons, missiles, and focused energy beams. Unlike the assembly's ceremonial weapons, these were designed to destroy. Devourer ships exploded or were torn apart. The organic hulls that had seemed invincible against assembly weapons proved vulnerable to concentrated human firepower. But the Devourers adapted quickly. They swarmed the human ships, using their numbers to overwhelm individual targets. Taeyang watched one of his destroyers get covered by 5 Devourer ships that began eating through the hull. "Break off and regroup," he ordered. "All ships fall back to Rally Point Alpha." They had won the engagement, but it was costly. 1 destroyer lost with all hands, 2 cruisers badly damaged. Against 16 Devourer ships, the price was high. On Viridian Prime, Shin Borum was brought in to coordinate the crisis response. The 33-year-old psychologist had no military experience, but she had spent her career studying group dynamics and crisis management. Now she found herself in a room full of panicked alien officials who needed someone to help them organize their evacuation procedures. "Stop," she said firmly when the shouting got too loud. "Panic will kill more people than the Devourers. We need clear protocols. We need communication chains. We need to tell people what to do and where to go." She worked 18-hour days, setting up systems that the assembly should have had in place centuries ago: evacuation procedures, resource distribution networks, psychological support for refugees, all the unglamorous work that kept civilization functioning during disasters. Dr. Kang Mirai received samples of Devourer biomatter from the battle site. She studied them in her lab with growing fascination and horror. The Devourers were not just ships, they were a species. Every part of them was optimized for consumption and reproduction. They ate matter, any matter, and converted it into more of themselves. "They are like locusts," she explained to Ji-won during a video call. "They consume everything in an area and then move on. But they are also intelligent. They coordinate, they adapt, they learn. We are not fighting mindless beasts. Can they be communicated with?" Ji-won asked. "I do not know. Maybe. But first we need to survive long enough to try." The battles continued. The Devourers pushed deeper into assembly space, and human forces rushed to meet them at each incursion. More human ships arrived from Earth, military vessels that had been in reserve but were now desperately needed. With them came soldiers like Yoon Dae-ho, who came out of retirement to lead ground forces. The first planetary invasion happened at a mining colony on the world of Sanctuary. The Devourers landed in biopods that cracked open to release swarms of smaller creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and fungus. They consumed everything: vegetation, buildings, equipment, and people. Daeho's Marines landed in the middle of the invasion. They fought in the streets, in the tunnels, in the ruins of what had been a peaceful colony. It was brutal, close-quarters combat that the aliens had no experience with, but humans did. "Fire in controlled bursts," Daeho ordered his troops. "Conserve ammunition. Watch your corners." Move as units, the Marines cleared the colony sector by sector. They saved thousands of alien civilians who had been trapped by the Devourer advance. The aliens watched in shock as these humans, the species they had feared and caged, threw themselves into danger to protect them. One young Centauran child, separated from her family, was found by a human Marine who carried her to safety through active combat. The image of the soldier covered in wounds and blood, gently handing the child to medics, was broadcast across assembly space. Choi Yoonji put her smuggling skills to use, running supplies through Devourer-controlled space. Her small freighter could slip past the organic ships using stealth systems and her knowledge of unconventional routes. She delivered medical supplies, ammunition, and emergency rations to cut off colonies and isolated military units. "You are going to get yourself killed," her co-pilot said during one particularly dangerous run. "Probably," Yoonji agreed, "but people need these supplies today, not when it is safe to deliver them." The war revealed something that made the assembly uncomfortable. Humans were good at violence. Not just capable of it, but skilled at it in ways that came from generations of practice. They knew how to fight, how to kill efficiently, how to make hard decisions quickly, and they were willing to die to protect others, even aliens who had treated them as dangerous animals. But the war also revealed humanity's other side. Shin Boram's crisis protocols saved millions. Mirai's research helped develop weapons that were effective against Devourer biology. Hyunwoo's shield technology was shared freely with assembly ships. Jiwon worked tirelessly to coordinate between dozens of species who had never had to work together under pressure. After the defense of the sanctuary colony, Thakalis came to meet Daeho personally. The Viridian counselor looked at the human soldiers, many wounded, all exhausted, and felt something he had never expected to feel toward humans. Gratitude mixed with shame. "I called your species dangerous," Thakalis said quietly. "I was right, but I was also wrong. You are dangerous to our enemies. You are salvation to your allies." "We are just doing what needs to be done," Daeho replied. "No," Thakalis said. "You are doing what we could not, and we will remember that." But even as humanity fought to defend the assembly, the Devourers kept coming. For every ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. They were not raiding. They were migrating, and the assembly was in their path. The war spread like fire across dry grass. Within 3 months, 17 colony worlds had been attacked. 8 had fallen completely. The death toll climbed past 50 million, and the Devourers showed no signs of stopping. The assembly, built on 3,000 years of peace, was learning the terrible cost of being unprepared. Yoon Daeho stood on the command deck of a transport ship, watching as another wave of refugees boarded. They came from 7 different species, carrying whatever they could save from their homes. Children clung to parents. The elderly moved slowly, their faces showing the shock of people whose world had just ended. "General Daeho," a young officer called out. The title still felt strange. Daeho had been promoted 3 times in as many months, not because he wanted rank, but because the assembly needed experienced commanders and humanity had them. "What is it?" "We have a situation at Sanctuary. The Devourers are returning in force. Intelligence estimates at least 200 ships, and they are bringing ground forces. The colony has 3 billion refugees from surrounding systems." Daeho felt the weight of that number. 3 billion lives. The entire population of Earth in the 21st century. All gathered in one place, thinking they were safe behind defensive lines. "How long until they arrive?" 16 hours. Then we have 16 hours to prepare. Get me Commander Taeyang and Ambassador Jiwon. We need every ship that can fly and every soldier that can fight. The defense of Sanctuary would become one of the defining battles of the war. 38 human ships and 12 allied vessels faced off against 200 Devourer ships in the space above the colony. The odds were impossible, but Taeyang had learned that impossible only meant difficult. "We cannot stop them from landing," he told his commanders, "but we can make them pay for every meter. We hold the orbitals as long as possible. Then we make them fight for every city, every building, every room if we have to." Park Hyunwoo's engineering teams worked frantically to upgrade the planetary shields. His harmonic technology had improved with each battle, learning and adapting to Devourer weapons. Now he was trying something new, tying the planetary shields into the same network as the ship shields, creating a unified defensive system. "It might work," he told Taeyang during a video call, "or it might overload and fail completely. I need 3 more hours to test it." "You have 2 hours," Taeyang replied. "After that, they will be in weapons range." Nam Jinho had been promoted to tactical officer aboard the Horizon's Edge. At 24, he was coordinating fleet movements that would determine if billions lived or died. He had stopped thinking about it that way, though. If he thought about the stakes, the pressure would crush him. Instead, he focused on the immediate problems. Target solutions, power distribution, shield rotations, one crisis at a time. The Devourer fleet arrived exactly when intelligence predicted. They came in waves, organic ships that moved like schools of fish, beautiful and terrifying. The space battle began with a massive exchange of fire that lit up the darkness like a new sun. Human ships darted between the larger Devourer vessels, using their smaller size and greater maneuverability. They fired, moved, fired again, never staying in one place long enough to be an easy target. It was exhausting for the crews, requiring constant attention and split-second decisions. But it kept them alive. Taeyang watched his tactical display as red icons swarmed around blue ones. They were outnumbered 5 to 1, but they were making the Devourers work for every kill. His ships were taking damage, though. Shields were failing. Hulls were breached. People were dying. General Deho reports ground forces are in position. Jinho called out. Tell him they are about to have company. Taiyang replied as the first Devourer landing pods broke through the orbital combat and streaked toward the surface. On the ground, Deho had organized the defense using every principle he had learned from a lifetime of military service. Defense in depth, prepared fallback positions, overlapping fields of fire. His Marines were spread across the colony's key infrastructure, waiting. The Devourer pods hit the ground like meteors, cracking open to release swarms of bioforms. They came in thousands, scuttling, crawling, flying things that looked like evolution had gone mad. Behind them came larger creatures, living tanks covered in armor like carapaces and armed with bioweapons that could melt through steel. Fire, Deho ordered, and the defense line erupted. Human weapons poured destruction into the Devourer swarm. Machine guns, missiles, energy weapons, everything humanity had ever created for killing was brought to bear. The Devourers fell in waves, but more kept coming. They stepped over their own dead, consuming them to fuel their advance. The battle lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of continuous combat in space and on the ground. Human soldiers fought until they dropped from exhaustion, were given stimulants and medical care, and went back to fight again. Allied forces learned from their human commanders, adopting tactics they had never imagined they would need. Choi Yunji ran supply missions through the combat zone, dodging Devourer ships to deliver ammunition and medical supplies to the surface. On her 8th run, her ship took a hit from a bioenergy weapon. The shields held barely, but her co-pilot was killed when a console exploded. She completed the delivery anyway, flying with one hand while using the other to tie off her own wounds. When she landed, medics had to pry her hands off the controls because she refused to let go until the cargo was unloaded. You saved 200 lives with this shipment, a supply officer told her as they carried her to medical. Then get someone else to fly it back up, she mumbled through painkillers. There are more supplies needed. In her lab, now relocated to a secure facility deep underground, Kang Mirei worked with samples of Devourer biomatter. She was making progress in understanding their biology, and what she found both fascinated and terrified her. They are not evil, she explained to Jiwon during one of their briefings. They do not hate us. They are following a biological imperative. They consume to reproduce. It is what they are designed to do, probably by evolution in some extremely hostile environment. In their own way, they are just trying to survive. That does not help us stop them, Jiwon replied. No, but it might help us find another option besides extermination. If we can understand what they need, maybe we can find a way to coexist. The Assembly is not interested in coexistence right now. They want the Devourers destroyed. Mirei looked at the samples under her microscope. And if we do that, what does it make us? We called ourselves evolved, civilized. Does that only apply when it is convenient? On the 20th day of the Sanctuary battle, Park Hyunwoo's shield network finally stabilized. The planetary shields linked with the orbital fleet created a defensive barrier that the Devourers could not easily penetrate. It gave the defenders a crucial advantage, forcing the Devourers to concentrate their attacks on specific points, instead of overwhelming the entire defense at once. It is working, Hyunwoo shouted over the communication line. The network is holding. Taeyang immediately exploited the advantage. He concentrated his fleet at the weak points in the Devourer formation, punching through their lines and destroying their landing craft before they could reach the surface. The tide of the battle began to turn. On day 21, the Devourers withdrew. They had lost over half their fleet and gained no ground on the planet. It was the first major defeat they had suffered. Deho walked through the streets of Sanctuary after the battle ended. The city was scarred and burned. Buildings were collapsed. Streets were torn up. But it was still standing, and 3 billion people were still alive. An alien civilian approached him, a Centauran elder who moved slowly on aged limbs. She reached up with one appendage and touched Deho's arm. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for standing between us and death. Deho felt something break inside him, the tension of 3 weeks of continuous combat finally releasing. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The Callus arrived at Sanctuary a few days later to tour the battlefield. He found Han Jiwon coordinating relief efforts in the refugee centers. The Viridian counselor looked at the destruction, at the humans who had defended this world at such cost, and felt the weight of his past mistakes. Ambassador G1, I owe your species an apology, he said. We feared you for your capacity for violence. We did not understand that violence in defense of others is not the same as violence for its own sake. We did not understand that being capable of destruction does not mean you desire it. We tried to tell you that 5 years ago, G1 replied. Too tired for diplomacy. We should have listened. The assembly was built on the idea that peace comes from having no capacity for war. We were wrong. Peace comes from having the capacity for war and choosing not to use it, except when necessary. You have shown us that, at great cost to yourselves, and the cost is not over, G1 said. The Devourers are still out there. This was one battle. The war continues. Shin Borum had worked herself into exhaustion organizing the refugee support systems. On the 23rd day, she collapsed at her desk and had to be carried to medical. When she woke up, she found a young Centauran child sitting beside her bed, the same one whose image had been broadcast across the galaxy being carried by a human marine. I wanted to thank you, the child said shyly. The coordinates led to a place that should not exist. According to assembly records, the sector at the galactic rim was empty space. According to the signal trace that Dr. Kang Mirai had been following for months, it was the source of everything. Commander Li Taiyang assembled a strike team for the mission. The Horizon's Edge, now battle-scarred but still flying, would lead 3 other ships into unknown territory. Their mission was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Find out what was sending the signal and, if possible, find out why the Devourers had awakened. Nam Jinho double-checked every system on the ship before departure. At 24, he had seen more combat than most soldiers saw in a lifetime. The young tactical officer had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that this mission was even more dangerous than it looked. All systems green, he reported to Taiyang. But sir, we are going in blind. No data, no intel, just coordinates in empty space. That is what exploration used to mean, Taiyang replied. Before the assembly made the galaxy safe and mapped, sometimes blind is all we have. Kang Mirai was aboard the Horizon's Edge for this mission, bringing her expertise in xenobiology and Devourer research. She had a theory about what they would find, but she hoped she was wrong. The journey to the rim took 6 days. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found a structure that made everyone on the bridge fall silent. It was a space station, massive and ancient, built in an architectural style that predated the assembly by millennia, and it was still active, running on power sources that should have failed centuries ago. I am reading life signs, Jinho announced. Multiple species. Some are Devourer, but there are others. And there is something else, something big in the center of the station. Take us in slowly, Taiyang ordered. Weapons ready but not armed. Let us not start a fight if we do not have to. As they approached, a docking port opened in the station's side. It was an invitation or a trap, and they had no way to know which. Taiyang made the decision to dock. They had come too far to turn back now. The team that went aboard consisted of Taiyang, Mirai, Jinho, and a squad of Marines led by a veteran sergeant. They wore full environmental suits and carried weapons. But Mirai insisted they also bring translation, equipment, and scientific instruments. We might need to talk more than shoot, she said. The station's interior was like walking through a museum of galactic history. They passed halls filled with technology from dozens of species, some familiar from assembly records, others completely unknown. And everywhere they walked, they saw Devourer bioforms, but these were different. They were dormant, held in stasis by fields of energy. This is a containment facility, Mirai breathed, understanding dawning. The signal is not from the Devourers. It is about them. They reached the central chamber and found what they had been looking for. A massive computer core, biological and mechanical, merged into something that transcended both. Connected to it were hibernation pods, thousands of them, most empty now. And in front of the core stood a holographic interface that activated when they approached. The hologram showed an alien figure, something that looked like it might have been an ancestor to the Viridians or Centaurans. Its message played in a dead language that the translation equipment struggled with, but the meaning came through clearly enough. 3,000 years ago, the early assembly had encountered the Devourers during their Great Migration. The Devourers were not an invading force, but a species following their biological imperative, to consume and reproduce, traveling from one region of the galaxy to another in cycles that lasted millennia. The early assembly faced a choice: share the galaxy with a species that would consume resources and threaten their colonies, or eliminate the threat. They chose a third option. They built this station, lured the Devourers into it, and forced them into hibernation using a weapon that disrupted their biological processes. It was not peace. It was not coexistence. It was imprisonment, and the weapon that kept them asleep was failing. They did the same thing to the Devourers that they tried to do to us, Jinho said quietly. Locked them away because they were dangerous. Mirai was accessing the station's databanks, her face growing pale as she read. The weapon was designed to last 3,000 years. It has been failing for the last 50. The Devourers did not wake up to attack us. They woke up because we could not keep them asleep anymore. Can we repair it? Taeyang asked. Yes, Mirai said. But should we? We would be doing exactly what the assembly did to us, condemning an entire species for existing in a way that is inconvenient to us. The choice landed on Taeyang's shoulders like a physical weight. He could repair the weapon, send the Devourers back to sleep and save billions of lives, or he could find another way, one that might cost more lives in the short term but would not make humanity into the same species that had caged them. He contacted Han Jiwan on a secure channel and explained the situation. What do you need from me? Jiwan asked. I need you to convince the assembly to try something they have never done before. I need them to give us time and resources to find a way for the Devourers to exist without destroying everyone else. There was a long silence. Taeyang, they will never agree. They want the Devourers eliminated or imprisoned. They are too scared to consider alternatives. Then we need to give them a reason to be brave instead of scared. We need to show them that there is another way. Jiwan took the proposal to an emergency assembly session. She stood before the same chamber that had voted to restrict humanity 6 years ago and made her case. We can repair the weapon and imprison the Devourers again, she said. But in 3,000 more years it will fail again, and our descendants will face the same crisis. Or we can solve the problem permanently. We can find a way for the Devourers to survive without threatening us. How? The Callus asked. He had become one of humanity's strongest supporters, but even he sounded skeptical. The Devourers need biomass to consume and reproduce. We have uninhabited worlds, systems with life but no sentient species. We propose a containment zone. Terraform these worlds to provide what the Devourers need and establish a boundary that protects inhabited space. That would take years, another delegate objected. Years during which the Devourers would continue to attack. Then we hold the line, Jiwan replied. We fight to protect everyone while we build something better. It is the hard choice, but it is the right one. The debate lasted for hours. In the end, the vote was narrow, but it passed. The assembly agreed to try. Park Hyun-woo's engineering teams were given the task of rapid terraforming. They used every trick they had learned, every innovation developed during the war. Seed ships flew to 30 uninhabited worlds, dropping payloads that would accelerate ecosystem development. It was the largest terraforming project in galactic history, and they had to do it in months instead of years. Meanwhile, the military had to buy them time. Every human ship that could fly was mobilized. Commander Taeyang led the fleet in a desperate holding action, keeping the Devourers contained while the terraforming progressed. The battles were brutal. Ships were lost. Lives were sacrificed. But the line held. Yoon Dae-ho found himself leading a ground assault on the ancient station itself. The Devourers had taken control of it, and his mission was to reach the central core and give Dr. Mirai time to attempt communication with the Devourer hive mind. It was the hardest fight of his life. His Marines fought room by room through the station against Devourer bioforms that defended their home with desperate ferocity. They pushed forward through blood and fire, losing soldiers with every meter gained. Mirai reached the central core with Shin Baram at her side. The psychologist had volunteered for the mission, arguing that first contact with a hive mind required understanding of collective psychology, not just individual behavior. They connected to the Devourer network and began broadcasting. It was not speech. It was concepts, images, emotions translated into signals the hive mind could process. Mirai showed them the terraformed worlds. Boram showed them the idea of boundaries, of shared space, of coexistence. For agonizing minutes, there was no response. Then the Devourers answered. The hive mind was not what they expected. It was not cold or alien in its thinking. It was desperate. The Devourers had woken early because the forced hibernation had damaged their biological cycles. They were consuming not from aggression but from starvation. They needed resources not to expand but to survive. The communication lasted for 6 hours. Mirai and Borum negotiated with an intelligence that experienced reality in ways human minds could barely comprehend. They offered the terraformed worlds. They offered boundaries. They offered a future where both species could exist. The Devourers accepted. The war did not end immediately. There were still battles to fight as the Devourers withdrew to their new territory. There were incidents where violence flared up from misunderstanding. But the momentum had changed. They were no longer fighting for extermination. They were fighting for coexistence. Choi Eunji was one of the first to fly into the containment zone, delivering supplies to help establish the monitoring stations on the border. She looked at the organic Devourer ships moving peacefully through their designated space and felt something she had not felt in months. Hope that they had actually done